Well, I got to looking at all of the stories of Jacob and Esau after Isaac and Rebekah had their children, and realized that the commentary about that is interrupted, or the story is interrupted by chapter 26 that really seems to be set before they had children, and had to deal with all of those things going on. And so before we really deal with all the backstory and projections and concepts that come out of the Jacob and Esau sibling rivalry and struggles, I thought it'd be best just to jump ahead and go ahead and do chapter 26, because there are some things that it tells us about Isaac that can be helpful in understanding some of that family dynamics that we read about with the Jacob and Esau story. So, and this is kind of long. It goes into a whole lot of things. This is a Yahwist narrative that really doesn't seem to have much knowledge of the Jacob and Esau stories, and so they're totally out of it. So it's good to kind of get this, because we'll presume that all of this was happening before Jacob and Esau were born. So now there was a famine in the land besides the former famine that had occurred in the days of Abraham. And since this is part of those three stories of famine and going off somewhere else to Gerar, where the king Abimelech of the Philistines, that this line here is probably added to try to harmonize the overall Genesis story. But anyway, there's another famine happening, kind of like when Abraham in time. And Isaac went to Gerar to King Abimelech of the Philistines. And the Lord appeared to Isaac and said, now this is kind of ironic, he's already gone to Gerar, and then after he goes there, God says, don't go to Egypt. Well, he didn't go to Egypt. He wasn't heading for Egypt. He went to Gerar. But anyway, this line comes in to emphasize the fact that God wanted him to stay in the land, and then God would provide. So do not go down to Egypt, where there's lots of water and lots of grazing for your animals, but settle in the land that I shall show you. So he's already there, but God's going to show him. So this is a little out of sequence. And reside in this land as an alien, and I will be with you, and will bless you. For to you and your descendants, and here we have a rehearsal of the promise, to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and I will fulfill the oath that I swore to your father Abraham. I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven, and I will give to your offspring all these lands, and all the nations of the earth shall gain blessing for themselves through your offspring. Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, and then it adds my statutes and my laws. Now there were no statutes and laws at this time. This is too early for statutes and laws. So we see that anachronism coming out that is an indication of the time of the writing of this story. Presumes we've already had Moses and the Ten Commandments and a priesthood and all of the laws and regulations, and the people were disobedient and they got carried off into captivity in Babylon for not being faithful to the statutes and laws. So we have, looking back to Abraham as a righteous model for the people, and so they just kind of assume statutes and laws as obedience to God as the way to do that. So anyway, that's an anachronism in this story. So Isaac settled in Gerar when the men of that place asked him about his wife. He said, "She is my sister." Now we're familiar with this theme. We've had this before. And in the former analysis that I shared with you of the other two, with Abraham going twice out of the land, but once to Egypt and then the other to Gerar, in that analysis they really think this may be the original story of the danger to the ancestress. This is my sister, not my wife. But anyway, for he was afraid to say, "my wife," thinking, "or else the men of that place might kill me for the sake of Rebekah, because she is attractive in appearance." Now, when Abraham's servant went to find a wife for Isaac, and he noticed at that point, and they told us that yes, Rebekah was a very beautiful young woman, healthy and strong, and very gracious and hospitable and so forth. So now they're married. Now they're traveling somewhere else because of a famine, and again the concern that the men of that place will kill me in order to take her. So when Isaac had been there a long time, King Abimelech of the Philistines looked out his window, and he saw Isaac fondling his wife Rebekah. Now, we're not sure what that was, except it's some intimate caressing that indicates they're not brother and sister, they're something else. And so Abimelech called for Isaac and said to him, "So she is your wife. Why then did you say, 'She is my sister'?" And Isaac said to him, "Because I thought I might die because of her." And Abimelech said, "What is this you have done to us? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us." So Abimelech warned all the people, saying, "Whoever touches this man or his wife shall be put to death." And so Isaac sowed seed in the land, and in the same year reaped 100-fold. Now, this is during a drought, a famine, and yet Isaac is able to sow seed in the land and grow crops. Now, Isaac is a shepherd. He has herds. What is he doing plowing the land and planting seeds? Well, Von Rad explains to us that he is a semi-nomadic person, and that at this time these people would live close to towns, and sometimes they would try to grow some crops, and that if you did have a good crop, the 100-fold was not excessive. It wasn't that much. It was kind of normal, productive crop. You plant one corn seed in the ground. It grows a corn plant. It puts tassels on it. It has silks. You may get 3 or 4 ears of corn. You know how many kernels are on an ear of corn? It's more than 100. So 100-fold is not an excessive amount. It's adequate. But in a drought time, in a famine time, it shows God is with him. He is blessed. That is the point of this sowing in the land and being blessed, that his crop doesn't wither and die, but it produces a crop for him. And he became rich. He prospered more and more until he became very wealthy. And he had possessions of flocks and herds and a great household. So the Philistines envied him. Now the Philistines had stopped up and filled with earth all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the days of his father Abraham. So I guess in the days that Abraham was sojourning in that area, he must have dug some wells, but the Philistines had already filled them up. And Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, you have become too powerful for us." So they're jealous of him, and they don't like his being there. Now this is a problem of envy that it doesn't happen in our country. We glorify people who prosper. We don't get mad at them and tell them, "You go away. We don't want you here." We adorize them and honor them and say they're wonderful, because that's part of our cultural values of getting rich and famous. Anyway, so Isaac departed from there, and he camped in the valley of Gerar, and he settled there. And then Isaac dug again the wells of water that had been dug in the days of his father Abraham. In other words, he dug all the gunk out of them and got them going again. For the Philistines had stopped them up after the death of Abraham, and he gave them names that his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of spring water, and the point they make is spring water is so much better than a cistern where you catch the rainwater and the runoff. Spring water is more filtered and more pure than just runoff water. The herders of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herders, saying, "The water is ours." So he called the well Esek, because they contended with him. And then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that one also. So he called it Sitnah. And he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over that one. So they called it Rehoboth, saying, "Now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land." Now that expression is very important, that in God providing the land for them, this making room for them, is that they are not run off by others who are already there, or attacked and killed by the ones that already live there, but has made a space for us to thrive and prosper. It's a fulfilling of the promise. So from there he went up to Beersheba, and that very night the Lord appeared to him and said, "I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you and will bless you and make your offspring numerous for my servant Abraham's sake." And the commentary there is not because Abraham was righteous and good, and for Abraham's sake God will reward his offspring, but rather that for Abraham's sake, the Von Rad says, what that expression means is, for the sake of the promise I made to Abraham, I will do this, not because I'm rewarding Abraham, but I'm showing my faithfulness as God. I make a promise, I will fulfill it. So he built an altar there and called on the name of the Lord, and he pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants dug a well, yet another well. Now one of the things Von Rad is saying is these stories are very, very old, and this what they call the etiology, the origin of a place and its name. So we have these wells, and their names go back to very, very ancient tradition. And that is the origin and the source of these stories and why they stay alive. Because as each generation is teaching their children about what do we call this place, why do we call it this, who are we, how did we get here, why are we still here, all of these things are a part of the name, the story of the origins. So anyway, this is very ancient early times, and partly why they think this story of Abimelech and Isaac was probably the original story, and then it got adapted for the Abraham cycles stories. Anyway, then Abimelech went to him after they dug the well, went to him from Gerar with Azuha, his advisor, and Philcol, the commander of his army. Now, when you go to visit and you take the commander of the army, you are trying to make a point. You're trying to show your power, your status, and your prestige, and sometimes some leverage if you want somebody to move again, but he doesn't at this time. So Isaac said to him, "Why have you come to me, seeing that you hate me, and you had sent me away from you?" In the past, in the earlier verses, you sent me away from you. But they said to him, "We see plainly that the Lord has been with you. So we say, let there be an oath between us and you, and let us make a covenant with you, so that you will do us no harm, just as we have not touched you and have done to you nothing but good, and have sent you away in peace." A part of that is it's a part of the proclamation that has, when other people will recognize, and we find this in the gospel so often, it's the sinners who recognize the power of God in Jesus, but the Jews don't, that there's a powerful statement of affirmation of God's Spirit at work someplace when the strangers, the non-believers, recognize it and give testimony. And so we have this place, here's Abimelech, is giving testimony, witness to God's power and blessings on God's chosen. In this case, Isaac, at this point in the story. We see plainly that the Lord has been with you. So we say, let there be an oath between us, and so forth. So you are now the blessed of the Lord. So Isaac makes them a feast, and they ate and drank, and in the morning they rose early and exchanged oaths, and Isaac set them on their way, and they departed from him in peace. That same day, Isaac's servants came and told him about the well that they had dug, and said to him, "We have found water." Again, blessing upon blessing upon blessing is being received by Isaac. And he called it Shibah, Shibah. Therefore, the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. Again, an etiology. Where did this place get its name? How come we call it that? And so this is a very important site, Beersheba. And then the last verse, or two verses in this chapter, are from the priestly version. And it says, "When Esau was 40 years old, he married Judith, the daughter of Beri, the Hittite, and Basemath, daughter of Elon." So he marries two women. Again, a daughter of a Hittite. And they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. So Esau, at this point, shows that he's really not a good choice for the leadership of the people. He's married outside the family. He's married the Hittites. And he's being drawn away and being influenced by them in a negative way and causing great strife between Isaac and Rebekah and Esau and his family. But that's another thing that just kind of stuck in there, and then in 27 it goes to the deception of getting the blessing as Isaac is very old in his age. So we have that story has happened, and let's see, we got to pick up and go back. My watch broke. I told you about that last week. I was out the garden. Let's see, okay. I'll have this to keep an eye on my time. Okay, so what we have in that story, we see some characteristics of Isaac, and we see that Isaac is not a fighter like Abraham. Remember when Lot was captured and Abraham gathered up all his men and he went off and with his army and he had big battles with the people in the land, and he was a great warrior, and he rescued Lot. In these times where Isaac and his herders are in conflict with the Philistines, they do not do battle, and Isaac doesn't whip up on them and teach them a lesson. He says, okay, you can have the well, I'll go somewhere else. And so he's very conciliatory. And he is, just a survivor in a way, to do whatever it takes to keep the peace with these people and not make trouble. So he's not a hero in the sense of strong and stand your ground and that kind of idea. He just really kind of passive and just get along kind of guy. But it works because he survives. And in his making adjustments and moving from place to place, God is with him. He does prosper. He does survive. And in fact does so well that those who don't like him and want to push him away finally come around and testify to the world in the story that indeed God is with him. God is blessing him. He must have special gifts and powers and blessings from God, and therefore not only we're not going to be jealous anymore, we're going to stand in awe. And we're going to be very careful, because if this God can help him in such a powerful way, then if we offend that God by doing bad things to him, that God may turn on us. And so we don't want that to happen to ourselves. So anyway, so we see in Isaac this kind of more passive personality, this get along at any cost. So now we need to go back to the Jacob and Esau story, and to refresh our minds about that, I thought the Bill Power rendition in the Perkins Journal would be an interesting, because I read it out of the Bible before, but this is kind of Power's take on that story, and it's more fun to read. But anyway, he says the story of Jacob is the story of Israel. And this is important background. He said it's a self-portrait. Perhaps it is slightly distorted, but if so, the purpose of the distortion is to draw attention to the more glaring defects in Israel's character. Now, Israel meaning the people. Israel as a people, to show their defects in the hope that the reader might reflect and then reform. Again, there is a reason the Yahwist, the priestly version, and then finally the redactor is telling us this story. Not us, but the people of his time, because basically he wants them to see their faults and to repent and reform. So anyway, yet one ought not here to be looking for lessons on how to live. These are bad examples. These are not the good examples. As if the case with most satires, one is not given specific advice, one is simply invited to see oneself as others do. This is the story of God's dealing with and through an unscrupulous group of human beings who in a microcosm are one man. They are obviously self-centered, hypocritical, quick-witted, and deceptive rogues. Moreover, their deception, hypocrisy, and avarice leave behind a trail of broken relationships and sorrow, and they themselves reap their own harvest of loneliness, fear, and grief. Nevertheless, it is not a gloomy story. It is filled with hope based not on Jacob's treacherous skullduggery, but on the grace of Israel's God. Now, that's the background for how to be listening to this story. And he subtitles this, Harry and Grabby, as the nicknames for Jacob and Esau, or Esau and Jacob. Once upon a time, there was an old man and an old woman who had no children. Like many old men and old women who have found themselves in this situation, the two prayed to the Lord that they might have a baby. And the Lord yielded to their entreaties. The old woman conceived. Now remember, it was 20 years after they were married before she conceived. Soon she discovered that she was not only pregnant, but doubly pregnant, that she was carrying twins. The only grief in this otherwise happy state was that it quickly became apparent to her that the two were not going to get along well, for they had hardly been conceived before beginning to carry on regular wrestling match in utero. Now this is contrary. Do y'all remember the news story about twin babies that were born and when they came out holding hands? You saw that. Anybody else hear or read that story? It was very interesting. I mean, it was, here we've got these two fighting with each other in utero, but these two seem to have really bonded and felt so close that as they were, right after they were delivered, they were holding hands, that they had such a bond. Anyway, faced with these distressing circumstances, the unfortunate woman went to the local oracle in the area where they were living in order to ascertain from the oracle what was to be done. She wanted divine guidance, so she goes to a sacred place and gets advice. The oracle, in typical oracle fashion, answered her cryptically, "Two nations are in your womb. The two have been hostile ever since conception in you. The one shall master the other, and the older shall serve the younger. And so, in due course, the day came for the two to be born, and the first child was born red and covered with hair. So they called him Hairy. The second was born holding to his brother's heel. So they called him Grabby. Now, the commentary here goes, because of its puns, this etiology demands comment. Esau was born red, Admoni, an obvious play on the word and the place Edom. And he was born hairy, Seir, a pun on Seir, an area of Edom where Esau was later to live. Both the reddish complexion and his hairy body speak to a lack of sophistication, a characteristic that the later narrative will continue to emphasize, his lack of sophistication. Jacob was born grasping his brother's heel, Equeb, a pun on his name, and there's also a related verb on which there is a possible play here, aquab, which someone defines as to grasp by the heel or to cheat. I guess grasp by the heel is like in sports where somebody will stick out their foot and trip you. It's a sneaky move, which would then have the meaning to cheat. This verb appears in the narratives in 27:36, clearly referring to Jacob. And Jacob was the colloquial heel, ready to shortchange on each and every occasion, grasping and claiming for himself whatever he could get, to the end holding on. But one must not forget that this scheming, conflicted grasper is God's chosen people. Naturally, those who are outside, like Esau and the Edomites, are always uncivilized and just a little hairy to those who are on the inside. Well, anyway, in the course of time, they grow up, and Harry becomes a skillful hunter, doing a man's job and living in a man's world. As a consequence, he becomes his father's favorite, for his father liked the wild game that he caught and the way he cooked it on the open fire. Grabby, on the other hand, stayed home and learned to do the tasks that women do in the tent. And as a consequence, he became his mother's favorite. So the sibling rivalry that was born in the womb is further exacerbated by parental favoritism. Now, in that, he doesn't mention it, but when we read chapter 26 and we see the way Isaac is depicted as a person who is very passive and is kind of a get along to keep the peace as best they can, we could see that if Esau manifests in his character this very robust man's man kind of thing. He's a hunter. He's skilled with the sword and the arrow, and also, and I was reading in Rosenblatt, she lifts up that Isaac may have admired his older half-brother Esau, who was also a hunter, skilled with the bow, and a really rough and tumble guy, as we hear, and that Isaac is just rather passive. He's not a strong, combative, stand your ground kind of person. And so he seems to possibly have admired these qualities in his half-brother and now his son, his first son, and so that may be a projection of his own weaknesses that he feels and wants to have them fulfilled in or overcome in his son. So he favors Esau, and then it sets up this distinction between the two that sets up this rivalry for a father's affection. And Naomi Rosenblatt, in her book, The Wrestling with Angels, and what the first family of Genesis teaches us about our spiritual identity, sexuality, and personal relationships, really does a very thorough analysis of the Jacob and Esau dynamic, and particularly Jacob. She says that we have more about him and his character development over his whole lifetime than any other Genesis character. And so she uses all of her psychology background as well as biblical studies to point out a lot of interesting possibilities. But in this approach, we have in the birth narrative of Jacob and Esau a prediction, a prophecy, a foreshadowing of these character types and life decisions and their consequences. She says that Jacob is the Bible's first anti-hero. He's an anti-hero. He's emotionally overwrought. He's easily manipulated. He's prone to spontaneous outbursts of weeping. But in spite of, or maybe because of Jacob's character, sort of like Isaac, he survived because he wasn't combative and stand your ground, because that could have gotten him killed and that would have been the end of it. But anyway, Jacob has special qualities. But in the first part, in the early part, they're really character flaws. They're weaknesses. But he does survive, and he does learn, and he grows, and he eventually earns some respect. And he becomes a vital link in the chain of the patriarchs, establishing this people of God. Now, the Hebrew people are always, wherever they are, not the most powerful. They are always in a somewhat vulnerable kind of setting, and they are not number one in the world. But Jacob is a very human person, and he's driven by unconscious drives. Now, Rosenblatt says that we can identify with Jacob's life's journey because his feelings of inadequacy are very familiar to most of us. Anybody in here ever not have a feeling of inadequacy? At different times, different places, we're really challenged by life situations and question our ability to meet the challenge. So we can identify with feelings of inadequacy. But like many of us, he feels overwhelmed by the demands and the expectations of the people in his life. He's trapped by his birth order. Be kind of interesting. How many only children do we have? 2? 3? Okay, 3 only children. How many of you are the oldest of your family? How many are second or middle child? How many are youngest? Oh, lots of youngest. Okay. Well, those positions in the family carry expectations. I don't know if any of you remember if I've mentioned this, but when I was born, my father was the oldest of three, and I am a middle child. I have two older sisters, but I am the first son and the first grandson in my dad's side of the family. And I am named William Earl Tankersley the third. Now there's pressure on being named for father and being a junior if you're the oldest son. But then if you're the third, either you are expected to carry on this great tradition of grandfather, and actually my great-grandfather was also a William, but he wasn't William Earl. He was William Andrew Jackson Tankersley, which loaded him up with expectations of leadership and accomplishment with that name. But either to fulfill the glory of successors or to overcome all their failures and finally be a success. So there's, just in the name, there will be expectations, but that birth order, oldest son, oldest grandson, from an early age, and I didn't recognize it, I recognized it later, there's a lot of expectation to succeed and do well. So what we have in the birth order and position in the family are different expectations and drives and so forth. In a very strong patriarchy society, practicing the primogeniture, meaning firstborn son inherits control and wealth, Jacob just missed that. And then he has that to deal with, and then he has a strong and overbearing mother. Now we will remember Rebekah and her personality. She wasn't a shy and fade away kind of girl. She was out there. She was working. She was strong. She was attractive, but she would step right up and she welcomed this stranger. She offered to water the camels. She offered the invitation to the family to come to their home and to be welcomed there. She accepted the offer to go with this man into the unknown, to an unknown family, to be the wife of this relative who happened to be obviously wealthy to send this servant with all these camels. But yet she was willing to risk. She was willing to step out. So a woman of that character and quality in a male-dominated culture, if all of her ambition and drive and confidence and courage is going to find fulfillment, it's going to be through her sons. Because if her sons don't succeed, she's like the widow and orphan living in poverty. So anyway, so she's a strong push on her sons, or the one she chooses of the twins. So anyway, so this is Jacob's coming into the world and the experience in his family home, as Rosenblatt is kind of pointing out. But it's curious that Rebekah favors Jacob over Esau, the stronger, the more masculine model, Esau, but maybe she could see that his desires and values were very short-sighted and immediate gratification of his personal desires. She may have noticed that in him. And she may have recognized that Esau would not have the leadership and negotiating skills to survive in a world where he and his people would always be in the minority, in a vulnerable state, less powerful in among their neighbors, that his people would always be in the weaker position, the more vulnerable status among the neighbors, and would need more negotiating and crafty skills to survive. And if you use the brute force against the stronger opponent, you most likely die. You don't win. It's kind of like the gunfighters in the westerns. Someday, there's going to be somebody to come along who's faster on the draw. I mean, you can be fast and you can kill a lot of guys, but someday, somebody's going to be faster. What's the movie where James Garner is the sheriff and he just sticks his finger in the gunslinger's gun? He said, support your local sheriff. You know, that was funny. But he was, in that one, he was realizing that just always being the fastest on the draw and killing the opponents, at some point, you're going to run out of luck. You need other skills. And so James Garner and Support Your Local Sheriff used all of those other skills to survive. Let's see. Jacob also has the liability of being rather sullen. He's remote from his father, Jacob isn't sullen, but Isaac is sullen, and he's a remote father. And at the time when Jacob is cooking the soup, and Esau comes in hungry, and he's willing to sell his birthright for this bowl of soup, at that point, we get the indication that Isaac had shown his favoritism to Esau, but that Jacob was always wanting Isaac's approval, and that he never quite got it. And so he has to deal with that. Now, in that regard, in life, if one is not the favored one, one is not the firstborn, who also could be, what was it? There was somebody, I heard an interview on NPR is a female actress, and I just heard part of it, but she was very successful, but she was saying that in her family she had an older sister who was really beautiful, and everybody would talk about how beautiful her sister was, and that she was not ugly, but she wasn't strikingly beautiful. And she said when she was 9 years old, she asked her mother if she was beautiful, and her mother answered, "You're cute." And she said she couldn't believe how devastated that was. If only her mother knew. If her mom had just said, "Yes, you're beautiful, sweetheart." But what happened is one could be crushed and so terribly wounded and damaged that you just withdraw and go off and do nothing, and be bitter and blame the world for all your problems. It's all their fault. Or go the other way. By golly, that isn't fair. I'm going to show them. I'm going to work extra hard. I'm going to do my best to prove myself worthy of their respect. They don't have to love me, but I'm going to earn their respect by working extra hard. And I'm going to overcome whatever those hurts and liabilities and rejections have caused me. So I turn it into motivation rather than excuse. It can be an excuse. It's all their fault. They didn't treat me right. I didn't have a chance. Doomed from the start. Or, well, the hell with them. I'm just going to prove they're wrong. And go off and do great things. So a lot of second and third children, in order to win their place in the family, have to work extra hard. Have to do more. Because often firstborn get all that extra love and attention and energy. That's one thing. Once you have the first child and you spend all that energy, and then you have another child and you spend more energy, and then you have a third child and you spend more energy, and then you have a fourth and a fifth. You don't have so much energy. And a lot of those families with lots of kids, then the older children become surrogate parents, and they spend energy trying to help. I had at one time my younger brother. I had to have we could call it a come to Jesus or a heart-to-heart talk. And he thought, he was mad at me and bitter with me because he thought I was too mean. And I'll have to confess that I was guilty of teasing him and doing some mean things sometimes. But as we were older, he kept carrying that. And when we had this come to Jesus thing, or heart to heart, and I explained, my dad was a general contractor, and he wasn't around a lot because of when you have deadlines, it's raining, there's a steel strike, and steel is delayed, and yet you've got the contract with the deadline. He built schools in Norman. You had to have those jobs done by August because kids were coming to be in the classrooms. So anyway, since Daddy was gone a lot, just by the way family dynamics work, I felt obligated as older brother to try to help raise my younger brother, and he took that and was bitter about it as I was being mean to him, and he didn't like it. But when I explained that this was kind of the way family dynamics worked, and I was trying to be a good older brother and help him, but I was only 3 years older than him, I wasn't mature enough to know how to do it right. But it wasn't from maliciousness to hurt him. And after we had that talk, he kind of said, "Oh, yeah. Well, I can understand that." So he kind of forgave me for a lot of it. He didn't forgive me for all of it because some of it was big brother meanness, teasing that was hurtful. But I won't tell you about those because our time is up, I think. And I'll avoid true confession time. Well, we got 1 minute. Any questions about how far we've gone so far?
Fascinating class this morning.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks.
A lot of good stuff.
Okay.
The Army commander. Army has never been mentioned before, all our way up.
Oh, okay.
We get an Army.
Yeah, an Army commander. Yeah, his.
Never mentioned before. Right?
Yeah. Well, I think he was in one of those other wife-sister stories. I have to go back and look. I can't remember now because I was reading all of them at the same time when I was comparing, so that might be the only one. But yeah, that's a way of showing your power if you're coming to negotiating these oaths and agreements. It's kind of a subtle way. If you don't, then we may have to do battle. And I've got a bigger army than you do. See, I've even got a general. So, yeah. I don't know. Well, maybe so. We'll have to check. Do your homework. Anyway, let us pray. Well, dear God, thank you for all the ways you do bless us, and that even whatever birth order or life circumstances present difficulties and liabilities for us, the way we face them and handle them can be a blessing, for they can become a strong motivation to overcome and to be better than we would have been otherwise, with your love and grace guiding us, supporting us, strengthening us. In Christ's name, amen.